Okay. Well, why don't we go ahead and start? Thanks for joining today. Um, I'm going to be talking about business application and capability road mapping. Um, I recently joined Proofpoint as the director of financial systems. I previously was with Gilead Sciences, where I helped to develop their ERP strategy and roadmap. I developed and led the ERP steering committee and had oversight over the development team, the delivery team, and we did a lot of streamlining on processes and systems for the global finance organization and some of the other organizations there. I've been in the Valley for over 20 years. I've worked as a finance manager, finance and accounting. I've worked within information technology, but always focused on helping organizations scale their systems, processes, and staff, to support growth and streamline operations and controls. I've been at several publicly traded companies in the Bay Area, from startups to larger companies. A couple of areas in Macrovision, eBay, OpenWave, and Hyperion Solutions. My role now is at Proofpoint, and Proofpoint is a leading cybersecurity company that protects organizations' greatest assets and biggest risks, their people. With an integrated suite of cloud-based solutions, we help companies around the world stop targeted threats, safeguard their data, and make their users more resilient against cyber attacks. Leading organizations of all sizes, including more than half of the Fortune 1000, rely on us for people-centric security and compliance solutions that mitigate their most critical risks across email, the cloud, social media, and the web. Very excited to be working with Proofpoint. In my experience with different companies in the Bay Area over the last couple of decades, I've had the opportunity to do several different types of road mapping activities, some large, some small, but they all had some certain things that were in common. And what I'd like to go through today is kind of a strategy for looking at road mapping exercises within your organization. You may not need all of these ideas. Some of them may be helpful for you, but you need to always consider your company, what are the key priorities for the company, and what is the company able to digest, what makes the most sense. In many cases, you don't have to go through all these steps, but it's good to be able to consider them so that you have a full concept of what you need to be able to get back and build for your organization. In every organization, whether it's been one leader who led the prioritization or a group of leaders, having a strong governance with appropriate representation has always been critical for success of building roadmaps and for developing projects and making the business grow. So making sure that you have a strong governance is critical. Of course, we always gather business requirements. I'll show you some areas where we talk about how we gather requirements and how we categorize those requirements based on what's critical for the company's strategy. We'll look at identifying enabling technologies and doing some type of scoring. From there, I'll talk about how to group projects, programs, and initiatives. I'll give you some ideas on how you can do it. Everybody's going to be a little bit different. Some companies may have strategic initiatives that they're working through over a 3 to 5 year period, for example. Others may have more specific short-term objectives, and that's fine. One thing I will say, though, it's important to separate the run activities from the roadmap activities. And what I mean by that is there are certain projects and enhancements that the business needs to do just to stay afloat, keep the business running. And those should never have to compete with roadmap projects. So that's why I have a separate run activity outlined, so that your infrastructure needs are not competing with somebody's CRM system. I'll talk a little bit about constraining the roadmap, providing cost estimates and sequencing programs and projects based on the scores, and also dependencies between the projects. And then last, I'll just talk a little bit about how do you keep this thing going? Now that you've built a roadmap, you know as well as everybody else that as soon as you build something, it's going to change. So I want to talk a little bit about how to continue to maintain the roadmap as you go forward. We were talking about some of the high-level steps. I'm going to go right into the governance. In many situations, if not most situations, I've helped to organize a steering group that oversees decision-making for projects, application and implementations, and enhancements. Representation from the business is critical, but it needs to have a path for decision-making. And so it also needs to have initial input on the prioritization of the key areas of the business. And sometimes this has taken an opportunity to sit down with business users, sit down with the senior leadership, find out what's critical for them, where are the big pain points in the organization, also looking at where the business is going, what the business is trying to accomplish in their directions. Are they growing? Are they stabilizing? Are they doing acquisitions? So it's really important to have that perspective as you start to put together the governance and decide on how decision making is going to happen. I've often found that it starts within the functional business areas, and it's going to be critical for the functional business areas to start that process. If there's a cross-functional business organization within the company, I've put together, in some cases, an application oversight committee. And this is composed of senior leaders in different organizations that have crossover with their processes, crossover with their data, process flows, and their systems. So if you're working with the sales organization to put together a quoting process that's going to feed into your ordering process and into your invoicing process, then you need to have people, the appropriate people at the table. It's also a good idea to work with the IT organization, understanding, what's the overall architecture strategy and what's your cloud strategy. Are we an on-prem company? Are we doing as much cloud as possible, or do we have a cloud-first strategy? And then, depending upon the size of the activity, it's good to have a steering committee at the top to help provide just the basic guideposts along the way. So this is an example of a roadmap project where we identified specific themes that were critical to the organization. And as I've been talking about, these can come from documented corporate strategies or the development of these types of capabilities or needs by sitting and talking with senior leadership. Developing these themes directly through interviews is a great way to really understand what's at the top of senior leadership's mind. And when you see the same thing coming from different senior leaders, you know that those things are going to be higher on the list. They're also a great way to prioritize and score and put some weight on the different business requirements that you'll be gathering as part of your activity. One of the things that I found really challenging is when you have a large organization that's doing technology and capability mapping. Everybody kind of does their own thing, and I found it really helpful to make sure that you're gathering the information in a similar format, and that everybody is agreed on what are the important things to the business, so that you can gather that information back from the business users. So for this example, we have business capabilities that are needed, but we're also asking the business to score based on the business risk, on the compliance risk, and where it fits into the strategic objectives of the organization from a capability perspective. Gathering these from the bottoms up will really help to make sure that you've got a full list, and also make sure the business understands that you're listening to them. That's critical. They need to see that their requirements are on the page. Priorities like business risk, compliance, it depends. That's where the steering committee really needs to weigh in. What are the key areas that we're going to be grading these and scoring these on? What are the key drivers for the organization? Adding the capability theme and the strategic priority, again, helps to provide an additional prioritization and scoring. And then always track the business function and the process so that you can look back on the organization as a whole, understanding where, like you can even do a heat map by business process to see where you have the biggest gaps or pain points. From there, you've got a long list of a lot of things, and it's important to be able to group them in a way that makes sense for implementation, right? So one way that I found really helpful is to identify what technology enablers are going to provide the solution for any given business requirement. It's really the how you're going to provide that capability solution. So identifying what those tools are, and it's not a product. It's not a Viva or a software or a Salesforce.com or a Sugar CRM. It's customer relationship management that's gonna solve that. If we keep things at a high enough level, then we can look across the organization to see where other parts of the business, or even within a function, what other departments need the same type of technology enablers to support their business. Examples, I put a few here, like content management, advanced analytics, collaboration tools, learning management. These are really the how things are going to be done, and they're done at a significantly high level so that you're not pinning everybody who needs that capability down to a single application or product. One of the most fascinating things that's come out of this type of exercise for me is looking at the organization when you've put together a list of technology enablers across a function. And I kind of put an example here so you could see, for the different technology enablers, I've got, for example, ad hoc reporting. Sales has 3 requirements that need ad hoc reporting. Finance has 3, and supply chain has 3. But look at my advanced analytics. Everybody needs advanced analytics across the whole organization, and I've got quite a few requirements that are supporting that. So again, internal collaboration, and I just highlighted a couple here so that you can see. In one organization I worked for, they had, for every different department in the company, they had a different learning management tool. And you'll see that when it comes to things like content management or contract management, internal collaboration, everybody in the organization needs that. So it's good to see what those basic requirements are, so that once you get down into executing a project or program, you know who has inputs into that discussion. And whether you implement 1 or 2, at least you don't have 10. And it's not uncommon to see that in a lot of companies. So I thought when I did this exercise, in a program that I was working on, to be able to see this perspective really has some weight. And you can also use it for scoring. If everybody in the organization needs a certain technology, it may be able to be weighted higher for implementation on your roadmap. So I talked a little bit about some of the weights. We've gathered in our business requirements, we've gathered compliance risk or business risk, or ROI. It's important to have the steering committee provide some oversight in the actual values that are provided by the business, so that, number one, everybody doesn't put high for everything. It needs to make sense, and it needs to be it needs to have some oversight, and people need to take responsibility for those, so that you really get something that's prioritized for the business. As I mentioned, you can use your strategic priority also as a weight. Once you're able to score all these different business requirements, you can kind of roll them up and see exactly what not only the intrinsic score for that specific requirement was, but when you roll those requirements up into projects and programs, you can get an intrinsic value for the program and project as well. This is just an example. In this case, we used a compliance impact. We used a risk management component for weighting. In this example, the risk of not doing something. And then we used our capability theme. If you look at the box on the upper right, you can see that requirement number 2 used theme number 6. It had a high compliance score and a medium business risk score, risk management score. For each of those attributes, the 6 and the high and the medium, you can see the theme 6 on the left has a priority score of 3. So you get 3 score for that attribute. Compliance impact was high, so that's 3, and risk was medium, so you have a 2. Now, the weighting allocation is critical to be reviewed by the steering committee so that they can say, hey, we want to give the capability theme or our strategic direction, we want to give that 40% of the weight. We think 30% of the weight should be on compliance and 30% of the weight should be on risk. And so based on the attribute scores with that weighting, you can come up with a component score for every single requirement. And that's at the lowest level of your data inputs is your business requirement. So every single requirement will have that score, and that's just one way to do it. I mean, there's many ways to do it. You'll decide for your organization, what are the key things that are important for you, and you can weigh them high, medium, or low, or however what makes sense for you. Now that you have a list, and you can actually put this in order of importance based on your scores that you've provided for each of those business requirements, we're going to look at those holistically and start to group them. There's different ways to do groupings, and it depends on what your organization is focused on. If it's focused on chunks of activities that happen over a 3 to 5 year period, for example, or if you're focused more vertically in a portfolio, there's different ways to organize those. I'll show you an example on the next slide. But generally, our process is going to be grouping the business requirements into those larger buckets, and then looking within those to create the initiatives or programs or projects which will be executed by the organization. Then we're going to sequence those programs out based on the scores and dependencies to get kind of a baseline. Here's what we get just with raw scores. Again, I just want to encourage you to make sure that you're excluding from the projects and the requirements any of your run activities, your infrastructure support, your security support, making sure that you keep the lights on, all your application management functions and business support activities, best to be separated from this process so that they don't compete for those dollars. And in some cases, you may have to create something so that you can keep them separate. This is just kind of a visual on my discussion on taking all the requirements now at the lowest level and grouping them into these initiatives. In this example, the company has 3 initiatives: stabilize and prepare for growth. That's going to be, the first initiative that they go on. Then there's a business efficiency, there's a scaling function, and then there's improving data-driven decision making. So for the first example, there's a handful of requirements that are going to fit into that initiative, and then we're going to break that initiative into programs and projects. Because in this particular situation, when you have initiatives, you may have a timing impact between different initiatives. You can do it also in a portfolio perspective, and that'll help you to organize them within different functions within the business. Either way, it's important to have your initiatives and programs and projects defined so that people understand. And when I talk about an initiative, it's more of a large scale, multi-year, could be cross-functional effort, and it may include multiple projects or programs within it. You may be able to separate just a program which has a small number of projects. Maybe it's a 12 to 18 month project, or you may just have just a bunch of different projects that need to be done that are not specifically linked to a larger program or initiative. So it's good to be able to just have that definition. So once you're able to provide groups that are relevant to your organization, we're going to have to figure out how we want to sequence these things. Remember when we talked about grouping into initiatives, within the initiative, you may have a time band around that. So that may help you sequence those specific activities that are going to happen within that specific, let's say 1.5 years, you're going to scale the core. So you want to make sure that those initiatives are time bound and sequenced specifically within that initiative. The other thing that's important is to, as you've put these groups together, and I'll show you, I think it's the next slide, you're going to have a list of programs and projects that you can map out over whatever period, maybe 2 or 3 years. It's important to be able to take a look at those then and determine, wait, we missed something. I recall one example where we didn't have a scoring criteria around people or people management. So when we got to the end of our initial draft, we found out that the HR implementation was kind of toward the end. And we realized that we needed to move that up because it was critical for the organization. So in any cases where you have missing scoring criteria, you may see things that don't look in the right place. And so on the next slide, I'll show you one way to kind of take a look at that holistically. Also, during this process, the sequencing is critical to make sure that you have looked at dependencies between projects and programs. There may be a lot of integration projects that are coming up, and if you haven't looked at Workato and you don't have it, then you may want to be able to look and make sure that you've got some of those integration technologies available to you. You want to make sure that generally speaking, your high score programs are going to be executed before your low score programs, and that's why you've scored them, so you've prioritized them. You also may want to consider the company's development methodology. Because you're using an agile approach, you may want to start some projects earlier and go over a longer period so that you can finalize and make those better as you go through that process. If you have more of a waterfall approach, you may find that putting succinct start and end dates is going to be more helpful for you to make sure that you can accomplish key deliverables before other ones are started. And then organizing by portfolio depends on how your organization looks at changes and looks at change management, looks at how they're doing development and project work. So in one example, you could come out with something like this. This particular one I grouped by portfolio. So you can see for each year, you've got a handful of projects or programs that are outlined for each of those portfolios. Now remember, this is still a raw roadmap. We haven't constrained anything yet. So right now, we've pretty much got everything on there that we can think of based on the requirements that were gathered from the business. So it's important to be looking too here at those dependencies again. If you look down on the lower right-hand corner, you might see a shared service standardization or implementation. I remember at one company, we decided to implement our shared services before we did our ERP rollout so that we could minimize training and standardize on processes in our European Shared Service Center instead of spreading out all responsibilities for the ERP system over 15 or 20 different countries. So looking at your dependencies in that way can help you start to move things around a little bit on your roadmap based on other dependencies. So like I said, you've got a great roadmap, but you can't do everything, even though we'll try, as we always do, right? Now is an important time, now that you've got all your projects and programs together, you've put them in a general sequence that you want to use to execute. It's time to make sure that you've got a general level of effort for each one. Because you've got a lot of programs to estimate, I've found that just a rough order of magnitude is helpful at this point, just so you can get it into a ballpark. In some cases, you might say it's a small project within this range of dollars, it's a medium project, or large or extra large. And extra large may be, for example, a multi-year project. But just getting those groupings together and understanding the dollars associated with each of these programs and projects is going to be critical for determining what rolls into the budget. So now you have a constraint around funding or budget availability. You may also have resource availability or skills capability gaps or constraints. You may not have the people in your organization to be able to execute the certain types of capabilities or bring in those applications that the business needs currently. You can always go outside, but then now you've tapped into more of your budget and funding areas. So you're going to have to find a balance between what you do internally and what you do with external support, and that's going to play into what is available from the budget constraints. You may also have cross-functional trade-offs. For example, in the example we looked at before, a lot of organizations needed the same capability. Like I used a content management program, for example, but people may not all need them at the same time. They may not be a priority for one organization, but they could be a priority for another organization. In that case, you have a couple different options to either find the content management system that will support most or everybody in the organization, or start with a bridge project, something that will get you from the people who really need it now to the time when you're really going to have a full-blown content management program for the whole organization. So also something to think about when you're doing your dependency analysis and sequencing. As I mentioned earlier, you may have to implement some other underlying platforms to enable other capabilities. And then don't forget, there's probably some key business critical initiatives that are underway currently that may constrain new projects from starting. So one way to look at this at a very high level, we've broken things out into initiatives. Within those initiatives, we've got projects and programs that are sequenced over the period. Now it's time to look at the projects that are within each of those initiatives. And that's where we're going to start to look at finding those solutions. What applications are actually going to meet the business needs for those particular business requirements, and also starting to think about how that works with our costing or our general estimates for each of those programs. At this point, you've got a roadmap, you've got a sequence, you've got costs, and what I've seen, different organizations will use that as a kind of a baseline, and then as they're going through the annual budgeting process, take a look at the next several items that are on the list. Based on what's available within the budget, they'll select their top, or within a certain budget range, they'll select their top projects or initiatives. And then look across those to make sure that you don't have any dependencies that are impacting other organizations. But as I mentioned before, as soon as you have a roadmap, it's going to change. So it's also important to be able to have somebody within the PMO organization, if you have one, or somebody within IT that's supporting the business to help bring in additional changes. There's going to be new projects that pop up that weren't on the roadmap. They're going to have to be held up to the roadmap so that they can say, okay, well, we had these 3 projects or these 5 projects. We need to have this one, so what are we going to take out? And now that you've got the roadmap, you have a way to continue to iterate that. And on an annual basis, you can look at those projects and new and changes to those projects. You can look at those on an annual basis to set out the roadmap for the year. And then as the process continues, even after you've done the annual refresh, you may see iterations of that through the process, as long as you have a process that continually discusses and brings those new concerns and issues to the table. So you've got a roadmap. So what are you going to do with it? One of the things that I felt was really critical to all of the roadmap projects that I worked on was finding a way to make them live on into the future. Nobody wants to build a roadmap and stick it in a drawer. There's a lot of ways to do it. Most of the companies that I've worked for have come up with their own methodology for how they're going to keep this information and refresh it on a regular basis. But it's also important to make sure that you have visibility on it so you continue to see the interconnectivity and the importance of different capabilities across the organization. One methodology that I've found really helpful is the Open Group has an architectural framework that they've updated over the last several decades, I think. But it really provides an overview on how we can coordinate the comprehensive enterprise architecture so that we can make sure that we're building the things and the support structures that are needed to make sure that the business gets stays in the direction that it's going and meets its strategic objectives. This type of model will have links to the functional and departmental capabilities, the processes, the business objectives, which we're trying to meet with those processes. It'll show the projects and programs that have been created to support those. And then further, it'll show the technology systems and the infrastructure and the applications that are used to meet those process and strategic objective needs, as well as some level of master data and source of record and ownership. Not all the roadmaps that I've worked on have gotten to this level, and some of them have done it to a certain degree. I think it's important to look at it and be aware of it, and check out the TOGAF framework. It's very interesting, and you can adopt components of it and pieces of it as are relevant to the maturity of your organization. The nice thing about this type of structure is that it connects everything together. It connects the objectives and the goals of the organizations with the processes that support them, the system and data structures that support the processes, and the underlying technology that keeps everything running. And having this perspective can really be helpful when you're looking to build out, the next roadmap, and when you're enhancing the roadmap. You can see what available structures and capabilities you have in place to support the business. I've seen much cheaper and almost as effective ways of doing this, and more highly utilized by people in the business in a small perspective. I've actually been part of an organization that helped to build out the business process framework and creating websites which were linked into a data repository where you could link to the Visio diagram. You could have Word documents for SOPs, or you could have Excel technology details right on the Visio diagram. So from the web, you could drill down into the processes, the sub-processes, and then look at the steps and see documents and diagrams. Great for audit work, great for SOX and compliance, great to have that documentation for training. So there's a lot of really good benefit for determining what level of coordination you want to provide for this type of information, and how you provide access to it. Overall, just bringing it all together into an environment where people can use and develop new enhancements, new processes collaboratively, consolidating them into a single repository, and then making things available through different mediums for the business. So just a couple of key takeaways. We talked about governance and making sure you've got the appropriate stakeholders and alignment on prioritization, gathering the requirements with the data that you need to ensure that you can do proper scoring and prioritization. We talked about identifying projects, programs, and initiatives from those scored business capabilities, and looking to see how best you're going to meet your strategic goals from those requirements. Building in constraints. If we could only do everything we wanted, everything would be perfect. But of course, as well as I do, it never happens that way. So we need to constrain things, excuse me, and make sure that we can do the things that we really need to do, and have the things that we want to do available to do when we have the capability and the resources. And then make sure you have a place to hand it off and keep it fresh. That's key to all the hard work you've done. So I'm going to close this now. See if we have some questions. Okay. Please share the slides. Sure, you can have the slides. Okay, question from Anhali. How do you ensure the steering committee, SVPs, echo what is really important, not just strategically, but also operationally? Making sure they're aligned with their team that is more in the weeds. Yeah, she says our steering committee focuses on things that help grow the business and prioritize, but their teams struggle with manual processes because of automation. Automation's not a high priority. Yeah, it's true. I think the leadership is going to be the ones that are guiding these initiatives for building roadmaps and also prioritizing your projects that you have. So it's really important that they're in touch with the business. One of the things I pointed out in the presentation is if you're gathering business requirements from the bottom up, you're going to hear all the noise that's going on at the bottom. And that's really critical because that's where the action is. That's where the business is driving. It's the people that are hands-on and getting into the business and entering orders and shipping products. They're the ones that know where the pain points are. In one program that I worked on, it was the number one business strategic capability that the company wanted to focus on, and that was business automation and workflow. And I felt that was really interesting to come from senior leadership because when, after all, it had come from the business has said, I'm doing all this manual work. It's killing us. We can't grow this fast without putting more headcount in. We need to streamline. We need to automate. We need to integrate all this stuff. So I think the two things to answer your questions: number one, you need to have the steering committee that's talking with their base, with their people, and finding out what are the real problems, and then also making sure that you can hear what's going on at the business requirement level. I hope that answers your question. How do KPIs play into the scoring? I'm interested in getting the business. This is from Camilla. I'm interested in getting the business stakeholders to start thinking about KPIs. Well, KPIs are a way of looking at your process to see what's going well and what's not, right? So if I have KPIs to see, if I'm increasing sales or if I'm reducing costs or whatever it is that you're trying to focus on, KPIs are critical. I think what KPIs should be able to tell you are what's important to the business. And what's important to the business will come out in how you categorize the areas of your business requirements that are the most important. If you see on your KPIs that you're not meeting your compliance needs, or you're not being able to expand fast enough because you don't have enough focus on business imperatives, for example, then you haven't picked the right scoring attributes. And by looking at KPIs, I think you can help to see or help to recommend what some of those attributes might be. Okay. Oh, Christine says, Anahali, a few seconds ago, how do you separate run task from build? Yeah, great question. I think, again, it's important for senior leadership to be able to, and maybe this is even more on the IT side, to be able to educate the business as to what things are critical for the organization to be able to continue to grow. 5 years ago, security and compliance wasn't on the board meetings for companies that weren't focused on security and compliance, but today it's one of the hottest topics around. So we have to understand what are the critical areas for the business that we have to use to sustain the business, period. There may be projects and programs within that as well, but they at some level need to be taken out of the competition for the budget dollars that are on the roadmap. And that's my whole point with separating out the run activities from the roadmap activities. You don't want the guy in infrastructure saying, hey, you know what, I need to build out this new company that we just bought in London, and I don't have the resources because the sales team just got their new sales laptops and other devices with a new application running so they can do X, Y, and Z. You need to figure out how to do both and prioritize in a different way. Okay. Regarding business capabilities, TOGAF seems more technical and may not be business friendly. This is from Munit. Yeah, I think TOGAF is very technical at the infrastructure level, but I think just having a good understanding of what's happening, because it's not just the technical pieces that are the baseline of TOGAF. They're a component of it. It also focuses on the business objectives, on the business processes, looking at organizations holistically so that you can make sure that you're providing capabilities across an organization instead of implementing them, one by one in different areas in a silo. Off the top of my head, I can't think of anything specifically that I would recommend, but some of the things that I've put in this presentation I've found can be helpful at different levels of the organization and different types of programs. Business process mapping is a great way to link the strategic objectives of your organization to the specific processes that you use, prioritizing those processes. So when it comes to fixing hotspots or pain points within those processes, you can see which ones are more specifically focused toward the key objectives of the company. So you can take pieces of it, I think, and that's important. What else? How do we put a dollar value on enhancements, especially when they're done by internal support teams? Any model you suggest? Yeah, that's a great question. I think you need to be able to, first of all, the level of requirements you get in a road mapping exercise like this may be detailed, maybe not. Oftentimes what I found is as you go through, you need to have somebody reviewing with the business, their IT business person managing, getting a clear understanding of what level of project is this. We need to be able to get more information from our customers. Is that a customer relationship management system? Is that an integration with our current system to other databases or other data? Helping to get a good business requirement up first is the best, but considering that you're not going to get a full giant detailed business requirement, you need to be able to estimate at a very broad level. That's why I recommended like plus or minus 40%. Maybe this project's $1 million, but really maybe it's only 600K, but it could be 1.4. I think within your organization, you have to decide what's the right level of detail. And if you need to go back to business and you have time to go back to business, then I think it's important to be able to get down to the lowest level of that requirement so you can really provide an estimate that makes the most sense. And if your organization says, hey, I can't be 40% plus or minus, I can't run my business that way, then you need to go down to a more detailed level of that requirement to get that. And I would always include somebody from the IT organization because they may help you understand what infrastructure requirements, what are the interconnectivities and integrations you're going to need for that, as well as what types and sizes of applications are going to meet your needs. Okay, from Thomas, any suggestion on communicating the importance of tech debt? I'm not sure I know what you mean by, you mean the amount of technology that's part of your future business need. These types of exercises are always good to have some technical folks involved, some business analysts, some technology leaders, so that they can help you understand what you're asking for. You may think you're asking for an application, but like I said before, you could be asking for a whole new infrastructure, a whole new platform with integrations to multiple other systems. Oh, and what tool do you recommend for business process documentation? Oh, there's a lot. There's a lot of different tools for business process documentation. I don't think it's necessarily the tool that's the most important, but it's deciding what you want to accomplish. I've worked with some really great BPM consultants who've come in and said, hey, we can build you the Taj Mahal, or we can build you something that'll get you to the next step. And I think before you start looking at applications, you need to look at what it is you're trying to accomplish with your business process project. And who's going to be involved with it? Is it across the organization? Does everybody understand the importance of process and why, and what you're going to be doing with that? So that would be my recommendation. Address, let's see. Yeah. Trade-offs on the cost and resources it takes the IT to take something on versus the ROI, which is either time saved on manual tasks. One of the things we did at one organization is, as we started collecting the costs of the solution, so when we're putting together the ROI or the rough order of magnitude of the cost of that particular capability, we made sure that we included the right skill sets. If we had the right skill sets within IT, we didn't charge a dollar amount, but if we didn't, we could add dollars on for third-party consulting into that project. So if you have a project where you don't have a lot of in-house skill sets, you may want to figure in the costs of bringing in third-party consulting to do even the PM work or maybe some of the technical work because you don't have those resources in-house. And that's going to change the price of the project. It may help to modify the start or sequence for that particular project. But I think that's important to be able to ensure that you are putting the cost for that project and what it's going to cost your organization with the current resources that you have. Yeah, you may also want to address tech debt as part of the estimate for future work. Yeah, and I think it's true. You can't just stop everything and rebuild the trunk of the tree. You have to layer that on as you go through this process, and that's an important part of the reason that I recommend separating run, because you have to be able to continue to scale the organization, and maybe you need to be able to scale the infrastructure within IT to be able to support the upcoming barrage of projects and enhancements that are going to be part of the growth of the business. So it's a great discussion to have, and you need to have it with the leadership, the senior leadership, and with IT. Yeah. Great. Step by step. Yeah. We handle tech debt as internal enhancements, a few in every sprint. That's right. You have to layer on and continue to build the trunk. Okay. Anything else? Thanks, Christine. We've got 5 more minutes. Great. Well, I don't see any more questions, but good questions. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate your time, and keep in touch. Let's keep the discussion open.